Hey there, I'm Paul and this is another of my videos on PowerApps. Thank you for stopping by and watching. So what I'm going to talk about today is various methods of updating the data in PowerApps. So specifically forms and submitting and patching and kind of comparing the two. And then I also want to have a little look at using views as well from SQL Server or Azure SQL DB. And see how that all works. So I've been experimenting because I like my applications to run as quickly as possible, as I'm sure we all do. So it's interesting to try different techniques side by side and to see which gives you the best performance, and also to try them in different circumstances, because it's not always a clear cut of one is always better than the other. It's going to depend on the circumstance. So as I say, I've been doing a little bit of experimentation, so let me share some of what I've found with you now. So just to set this up, I've got a gallery here on the left of this screen. This gallery is just showing a list of menu items from a restaurant and their price alongside, and this is set up just as the data source, which is coming from Azure SQL DB, and I've made a copy of my table, so it's called menu item old, so I don't go over my my actual data. So that's why that's menu item old. So it's from SQL Server, and I've just put a sort by columns around it. So that's a delegable data source, and that will become important distinction a little bit later on. So that's my data source that we're using there, nice and straightforward. On the right hand side I've got a form which I'll be using to update the price of a few items, so we can see how that works and the performance of that, and I'm also going to be contrasting that against using patch, and we'll talk about how patch works in a moment when we get that far. So that's how we're going to begin, and then when I've done that I'm going to move on to the SQL Server views. So hopefully you'll find something of interest in here. So when I click on the items in my gallery, you can see my form is updating to show whatever the item is that I ticked on. So that's just because my item property for my form is set to whatever I've got selected in my gallery. So this is my menu item table gallery, and the data source for my form is that same table, menu item old. Okay, so let's have a look at making a few modifications here. So I'm going to change the menu item price of avocado sensation from 80 down to 70, and I'm going to hit the submit form button and we'll see what happens. Okay, boom, this is changed over in the gallery. So on my submit form I've not put in any command to refresh the gallery, because the gallery is based on the same data source as the form. Then when I update the form, PowerApps is smart enough to say, oh okay, I need to refresh what you're seeing in this gallery here as well. So that's how things work with the submit form. Another way that you can update things is using the patch command. For the patch command we've got 3 arguments. So my first argument under patch is just to say, okay, what's my source? What data source do I want to update? And then my next argument is to say, well, which row do I want to update? And for that you've actually got to return a row data type. So not just a single value, it's a row out of a table. So the way that we're doing that is we are filtering our menu item table to whatever the menu item ID is that we selected in the gallery, because that's the one that we're working on. But we also put a first around that, so that we are 100% sure that we're only getting one record back, because the way we're using the patch command here, we want to just update the one record. And then our third argument in our set is just to say what we want to change the values to. So in this case I'm only changing the value of one field. If I wanted to change the value of multiple fields, I could do that. I could just separate these things with a comma and then specify another record that I want to update. but for right now we're just going to update the menu item price, and we're going to update it to the value which we've got in this text box. So that's a quick overview of how the patch command works. We can use the patch command without having to bother setting up a whole form and the data cards and everything else. So let's see how patch performs. So let's change the value back to 80. So I'm going to hit patch again, and that should jump to 80. There we are. And I don't think there's much in the way of performance differences between the submit form and the patch. So I think those are both taking pretty much the same amount of time, and patch is doing the same thing that submit form was doing, in that I haven't had to explicitly put any kind of a refresh command in here. PowerApps is aware that what we have done is we've made a modification to this data source, and it's gone ahead and it's refreshed the gallery which is on the same data source. Okay, so this built-in refreshing kind of got me thinking, and I thought, well, what happens if we change the prices of some of the other items in here? Will we see those when we do our submits and our patches? Is it updating the whole gallery, or is it only updating the item that we've changed? So let's have a little look at that. So I'm going to change the price of the baked macaroni. I've got a little update statement in my SQL Server database just to quickly do that. So now the price is 170. Okay, and what I will do is change the price. Let's go into the player mode, change the price of my avocado sensation again. So remember, my baked macaroni has been changed to be price 170. Is that going to refresh when I do the submit form? Let's have a little look. Yes, it is. So that changed. So that's great. Does patch perform the same way as well? So let's have a little look with patch. So let's change this back to 180 again, and go into our patch, and we'll change the avocado sensation to 80. So let's see whether the baked macaroni changes in there. So avocado should go to 80, and baked macaroni is changed to 80 as well. So yeah, so it's refreshing the other records, not just the record that I have directly updated using the patch or the submit form. Let's do one other little test which I stumbled across, which I thought was worth sharing. So I'm going to change the price again. Now, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to use the submit form and the patch button, but I'm going to leave the price the same as it already is in the data source. So let's have a little look at that. So I'm going to hit the submit form button, and I'm going to see whether the baked macaroni changes. No, it doesn't. The activity lights that flash across the top only flashed for a very brief second. There they are, they've disappeared again. Let's try the same thing with patch. So remember, our baked macaroni in our data source is now down to 170, but is it going to update when I do the patch? Okay, and again, no, it hasn't changed. So there's a bit of sort of short-circuiting going on there. So if PowerApps sees that your data is the same as what's in the data source, so if there's nothing actually to change, then it doesn't bother doing the refresh. So it says, well, look, you haven't changed the record that you're on, so I'm not gonna refresh the other records that you've got there. So that's kind of interesting little wrinkle to be aware of. So let's make a couple of little changes and show you something else that I thought was kind of interesting. So in my menu gallery, like I say, I've got a delegable data source, and at the moment we'll see as we scroll down, come on. We only get as far as soup, okay, initially, and then we have to wait for that moment while the data gets refreshed, and then we can scroll down the rest of the way and we've got our final item is world's best smoothie. So remember that in a gallery, if you've got a delegable data source, you get the first 100 items visible straight away, and then as you scroll down to the end of the list, or you click the 3 little dots which appear at the bottom to indicate that there's more data, then PowerApps will go and get the next 100 rows, and it will keep doing that until you hit whatever the limit is for the number of records it can display. Now, in this case, I think that's pretty annoying behavior, because I've got about 120 items in there. So it'd be much better if I just brought the whole 120 items down and then didn't have this delay anytime I scroll past the 100th item while the other items appear. So sometimes this behavior of PowerApps is absolutely what you want, because if you've got a big data source, if you've got lots of records, then showing them all at once, that's not you know, good performance-wise. So kind of going through 100 at a time, or adding 100 at a time as needed to your list is good behavior if it's a long list, but it's, you know, poor user interface if it's just over 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little change here so that I'm always showing all of my menu, so I don't have to keep doing that extra bit of triggering the scrolling. So I'm going to use the first n command, and I'll just put in 200 for the moment. I know that's plenty. Obviously, be careful if you're using this technique, because if your list underneath grows to more than 200 items, then of course you're not going to see the new ones beyond 200. You know, you're not, because this is no longer a delegable data source, you get 200 and that is all you get. It will not trigger loading the next 100 in when you reach the bottom of the list. So you know, you may want to think, well, how many items am I ever likely to have, and then, you know, at least double that just in case. So there we are. So I've now got all these items showing, and this is, as I say, now a non-delegable data source, but I can always scroll right to the bottom straight away. I don't have to wait for these things to refresh. But let's see how that affects what we were just doing with the patch and the submit. So let's jump into the player again. I'm going to change the price of the avocado sensation down to 70. So there we are. Had a nice quick refresh on that one. Let's change it back to 80 using the patch. Okay, fantastic. Still reasonably quick. Now let's see what happens when we change this baked macaroni price again. So I'm going to put this right up to 200 this time. Remember, this is the baked macaroni. And so I'm going to change the price. Remember, if we don't actually change the data, then it doesn't trigger any kind of a refresh. So I'm going to do the submit form. So remember to watch the baked macaroni. Does it change to 200? No, it didn't. What about if we use the patch? So let's use the patch to change the avocado sensation price and keep our eye on the baked macaroni again. No, it didn't change. Okay, so we've got some different behavior depending on whether your data source for your gallery is delegable or not. So what's happening then, or what appears to be happening at least, is when my data source is not delegable, when I change a record either through submit form or through patch, then only the changed record is modified in the gallery. That's the only one that's refreshed in the gallery. The system, PowerApps, doesn't go and pull everything back down again from your data source, whatever that may be. So we've got a definite difference between delegable and non-delegable data source behavior with regards to the gallery information refreshing. So that's something that's worth knowing about. Now, if anything, I would say that when we are changing the prices, it's possibly quicker than it was when we had the delegable data source. And my guess would be is because it's clearly not refreshing the whole data source, it's just updating the record that it knows has changed. So because I've issued the patch or the submit form from PowerApps, then PowerApps knows that that row within the data source has changed, and it hasn't bothered going and getting all of the other rows for the data source as well. So that could be something that is useful to know about if the design of your application or the functionality of your application is that you're only likely to be changing the record that you're working on, that there aren't other users changing other records at the same time, and that you might want to see those. If that's not going to happen, if it's just you who's changing the data and you don't care about displaying updates, or you're pretty sure there aren't going to be updates to others, then you might want to make your data source non-delegable, and it will be a little bit faster to do the submit or the patch and refresh the one item that you've been working with, but your other items are not going to change. It's not going to check whether they've changed in the main data source. So that's one little takeaway from what we're doing here. Okay, and then, so just to kind of finish off there, what I'm going to have to do now then, so if I want my data source to be non-delegable because I wanted to bring in all of those records initially, rather than bringing them in 100 at a time, then whenever I do a submit or a patch, then I am then going to have to manually put in the refresh command if I want to be able to see any changes to other records within the data set. So let me just add that to both of those buttons, and then we'll see. Remember, our baked macaroni is 200 now, so 70 is the same price as it is at the moment, so we hit that and we expect the short circuiting to take place on the submit form, but that was followed by a refresh command, so we have got the update here. Okay, and it would be the same thing with the patch, because I've just put a refresh after that instruction as well. So baked macaroni is now 300. Wow, bit of inflation going on in baked macaroni prices. So here we are. Whether I change this or not doesn't really matter, because there is a separate refresh command which is going to run after the patch is completed, which should update my baked macaroni. Let me just, did I not actually run that? 300, 90 for the avocado patch. Oh, yeah, there we are. Sorry, took a moment, but that's now changed to the 300 because the refresh command is under that patch as well. Okay, and then that obviously is a little bit slower because it's refreshing the whole data set after each patch or submit form command. Okay, so what else should we have a little look at? Views I wanted to talk about. So what I'm going to do here is I've kept all this stuff invisible for the moment. I'm going to make it visible now. So here I've got my data source. Oh, sorry, I've got another gallery showing similar data, but it is showing data that's based on a view. So I've got a view. Give me 1 second. I grouped them together so that I could make them invisible and then make them invisible all in one go. So let's ungroup them so I can work with them a little bit more easily again. So in my gallery, we'll just see here that I've got a different data source for the gallery. So this is getting it from a view that I've just called test view. So in my data sources, you'll see here I've got another view which is called test view, and in my SQL server, so here is my test view, and what I've done with this is to kind of demonstrate how we get a lot more power by using SQL Server as the back end rather than SharePoint or Excel or something else. Is I've put a couple of calculations and things in here which would be difficult things to do, or perhaps not even possible to do in PowerApps if you're doing that data manipulation in PowerApps itself rather than in your database backend. And of course in SharePoint, you can't do that data manipulation. So I'll flick back and forwards between those for a moment just to sort of show what's going on. So I've managed to get a nice shading effect in this gallery, and I have done that by, in SQL Server, I've just used this row number command. This is a windowing function, and what the row number does, just take that out for a moment, we'll talk about that in a second. What the row number does is it will just give you a row number, so an incrementing row number, and you can specify what order you want to use. So I'm using it in the order of the menu item name. Could be any order I want, doesn't have to be the same order that they're appearing in, so I can order them within this command by anything I want. And then the percent is a mod function, modulo function. So what that does is it's just looking in here, I'm using mod 2, so it gives you the remainder if you do a division by the number 2 in this case. So is there a remainder or not a remainder? Effectively what that is telling me is this row number odd or even? So I get, should I shade this row, yes or no? And then in my gallery, all I need to do in the template fill is have a little if statement in there and say, okay, if row shade is 0, then transparent, otherwise make it grey. Okay, so that's a nice little trick there. So that's something that I'm not aware of any other way of doing it in PowerApps. I've seen Audrey Gordon has a little video on this on her site where she's shading according to the ID number, because she's doing it with SharePoint, and everything in SharePoint has an ID number, but that's only useful if you are sorting by the ID number. It's no good if you want to sort the things by, for example, the name of the item instead, because you can't guarantee that these are all going to go odd, even, odd, even, odd, even all the way through. Okay, so we've got that, and then another thing that would be very awkward to do in PowerApps itself is what I've done here. So these are my menu items. This system also has a table for the orders that people have placed. So what I'm doing here, I've got a little subquery in here, which is calculating the number of units sold. So it's looking through the order details table, looking for every time I've sold baked macaroni, and then counting up how many units of it I've sold, summing them up. So I thought I had opened there we go, the relationships. So what I'm able to do there is to say, okay, for each of my menu items, menu item ID matches to menu item ID in here, and then sum up the quantity of the item ordered. So you can imagine if you were trying to do that directly within PowerApps, you'd have to try and pull in this whole order detail table, which is going to be big, because it's all the orders over time. So that really wouldn't be very feasible. So, okay, maybe dwelling on that a little bit too much, but hopefully what I've made is the point that views are really powerful and can really extend the data that you can display to your users when they're working with PowerApps, because it's got so much more power and flexibility for doing querying and data manipulation. Okay, so here's my view, as I say, and over here this is the number of units sold over time. Now I also want to be able to update the prices on here, but what we will find is, if I use this patch command, let me just go to the on select, there we go. Okay, good. Yep, I haven't got any refresh on there at the moment. So I'm going to change the price of the avocado sensation again. So this is just essentially the same patch command as I've got above. So I'm going to hit the patch button. and we can see it's processing. It's gone off and done that, and it did. Have I put a refresh in there? Ah, yes, because I've put a refresh in there. Sorry, I didn't pull that down first. So obviously if I don't have a refresh in there, because this is actually based on a view and it's not directly based on the same data source, so remember this is based on test view, whereas this one was based on menu item old, my patch command is updating menu item old, because that's the table that the data is stored in. So if I change the price and I haven't explicitly put a refresh in, then we will see, there we are, as we would expect, this gallery updates because it is based on menu item old. This gallery does not update because it's based on a view. Now, that view in SQL Server pulls in information from the same table, but PowerApps can't see that. It's not aware of that. So there's nothing else changing in here. So if you're using a view, then you're really going to have to put a refresh in to make sure that when your patch is complete, when you've changed the record, that you're then showing the latest information that's there. Now that's because you're doing a refresh, obviously going to refresh the whole thing for you. So again, if we were to mess around with changing the price of another item through another system, perhaps we're pretending to be another user who's working on the system at the same time, we would see those changes coming through because we've got the refresh on there. Okay. Now let's do a patch again with the refresh. Let's make this 100 for the sake of argument, and just watch both of these galleries as I hit the patch, and we will see that pretty quickly the top gallery changes, but then we're having to wait a little bit longer for the lower gallery. So the plus side of using our view is that we've got a lot more flexibility in terms of what we can do with the data manipulation, and we can do all of that in SQL Server where we've got really good tools for doing it. But the downside of it is going to take a little bit longer to do the refresh. In this example, it's not taking very much longer, so let's hit the patch button again. That one's updated, now that one's updated. So perhaps this is taking a second or so, and then this is taking another second or so on top. Sometimes that's going to be fine, sometimes it isn't. You know, you've got to have a think about the scenario and how quickly you need your application to react. So let's jump into a little comparison. Just make sure these are both still running. Yes, they are. Good. Put that in play mode. So what I've got here are two slightly different versions of the same application. So this is the application which is used for taking orders in the restaurant, and we're looking at the same order so that we can compare everything very neatly. We're using the same data source, the same order. The only thing that is different is the method that I'm using to do the refreshes, and one uses a view and one doesn't. So this one uses a view. You can see I've got this shading going on again, which is something that, as you've seen, we can do when we use the views. And this one is just using a straightforward data source. So in here, if we're ordering new items, then we can click on a little thing which brings up the menu and then decide how many of that item the person is ordering, or record how many of the item the person is ordering. And then when we jump back, then we can see all the items here. And that's all working very nicely. What you can also do from here is you can change the quantity. So if somebody says, oh yeah, I want one cappuccino, oh no, we want another one, then the idea here is that you can just click change the price, hit the tick, and it will bring you back into here, and you can see that doing a little bit of refreshing on the screen. So on this version of the application, as I say, this is just based on a table. It's not based on a view, and my total is actually worked out by summing the items in the order detail table which have the matching order header ID. So I'm doing this calculation inside PowerApps itself. Okay. So now let's say I want to change all of these quantities down to 1, then I can do that, and I'm only having to wait about a second, I would guess, for that to take place. And you know, because PowerApps will sort of run asynchronously, you can sometimes manage to sort of go ahead and change multiple records while the last one is still processing. So there we are. So that is running in sort of traditional PowerApps mode, where we're doing a bit of calculating inside PowerApps itself where we need to, and we're just linking directly to a normal data source. Here we've got the version which is using a view behind the scenes, and it's actually using two views. It's using a view to do the to return the items ordered, and it's using a view to do the calculation as well. It's quite nice if you can do all your calculations in one place, and ideally on the server, and then just reference those in your application. Otherwise you may have to be doing the same calculation multiple times over in the app. So let's just change all these from 1 back to 2 again and see how the performance is. Okay, and we're waiting a little bit, and we're waiting, and oh dear, that's not good. Still waiting. Set the refresh on there. Come on. Did I change it to 2? Am I going crazy? Maybe I didn't actually hit the button to change it. There we go. So it's changed, but it's taking a fair bit longer to change. And in a scenario where you want people to be able to very quickly modify things, you know, it isn't great. It's a bit slow. So I've done all this work to base this on views rather than directly on the tables, and it's a little bit slow. So I'm not sure which one I'm actually going to go with. I think I will probably leave it the original way rather than change this. Now again, I can, you know, change it. It fairly quickly brings me back to the screen, and then I could change another one while the earlier refresh is still running. So let's change this one up to 3. So it's not terrible, because they could keep working, but it's not really ideal. Not quite the performance that I wanted to get back from it. You'll notice perhaps that when I do change these, I'm getting a second or two of the word refreshing data appearing. Let me just run through that with you quickly. So I mentioned that I am actually refreshing 2 views when I'm doing this. So there's a view behind here, and there's a view behind this form. I'm using a form to display this data, although you can't modify it here. It's just a display form. And there is a little trick that you can use when you have to do multiple refreshes of things, and that is to use a timer or a set of timers, so that you're actually running multiple things at the same time. So let me just try and find the relevant screen. Yeah, there it is, down at the bottom. So normally what you would have to do is on whatever button is triggering the refresh, is you have, you know, refresh source 1 semicolon refresh source 2 semicolon refresh source 3, and the way PowerApps processes that is it will complete the first command, and when that's completed, then it will complete the next command, then it will complete the next command. So it's doing them in serial, but you can get PowerApps to do these refreshes in parallel, and there's a little trick to that, which I've got on this screen. So I've got a screen, it's got a label on it saying refreshing data, and if we just make the items on it visible, why can't I find that screen? Okay, so there we are. Sorry, I just couldn't get to this screen because of I think the way the screen recording software is interfering with the scrolling and clicking right at the very bottom of the list. So what I'm going to do now then is I'm just going to make all these things visible. There it is. So I've got 3 timers on here, so I want to do 2 refreshes, and then we'll talk about the 3rd timer in a moment. So by basing things on a timer, you can actually send multiple commands for refreshes at once and have them processed in parallel rather than in serial, which should save you a couple of seconds perhaps on your refreshes. So on my first 2 of these, I've got some on-timer start. Here we are. So this is saying, okay, refresh. So one of my sources is order detail summary, so that starts that refresh going. The next one is refreshing order summary, so there's order detail summary and order summary. So those are both set to start 10 milliseconds after the form appears. Why don't we make that 1 millisecond, and then we're going even faster. And then what I've got here is I've got another timer, and that one is just going to send me back to whatever screen that I was on previously. So the idea here is that when you want to refresh your multiple data sources, you have a screen on which you have a timer, so that the timers start straight away and they start refreshing those data sources, and then you have another timer which you set for a little bit later. In this case I've put it on a 200 milliseconds, and then that will take you back to whatever screen you were on when you jump to this one. So let's just show you some of that. Got a few screens in this application, so get back to the right ones. So here we are. So there on my refresh button here, I just say, okay, look, take me to this refresh screen, the one that's refreshing my order summaries. So that would take me to the refresh screen. It would kick off the timers. The timers start the refresh going, and then the final timer just takes me back to the screen that I was on previously. And similarly, when we're going into these records and making a change to the quantity, then when we hit on this button, that does the submit form, and then on the form itself, that's where we have the instruction. Well, first of all, I've got an instruction which says go back to whatever screen you were on before, so that takes you back to the screen which was showing you the customer name and the things they've ordered. And then I've got a navigate command to navigate me to that refresh screen, and as I say, when that screen appears, then it does its multiple, starts off its multiple refreshes, and then the back instruction on that will take it back to whatever screen it was on before, which is actually the screen which is one back from here. So if you kind of follow that through, this jumps us back to the screen with the customer name and the orders. Then this command takes us to the refresh screen, and then the back command on the refresh screen takes us back to the one that we were on previously, which is the one which has got the customer name and the orders. So there we are. So I've tried a few little tricks to get this running as quickly as possible. I'm still not, as I say, 100% happy with the speed and the performance. So these things are always a little bit of a little bit of give and take. Is it worth it to give up a little bit of the performance so that we've got the stripy appearance on here with the shading, and we've got the calculation for the order due being done on the server rather than being done in PowerApps. So in this particular case, after all that experimentation, I think I'm probably going to stick with the original way that we were doing it, where when we make the change, it's visible that little bit quicker. But that's just this one specific example. As we can see here, there are going to be other times where you want to use a view in SQL Server because you've got a lot more functionality there, and you want to do things like, for example, in this one, we were showing the total quantities that have ever been ordered, and that would be very awkward to try to do directly within PowerApps, if not completely impossible. So you've got to weigh these things up. So you may be giving up a little bit of performance in order to gain some extra functionality. The choice is yours. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Happy PowerApping. And do take a moment to put something in the comments. Was this useful? Was it not useful? Is there something else that you would like me to cover? I do read the comments. I don't have time to answer every single one, but I definitely do read them, so I'd really appreciate you just dropping something there. Okay, thanks very much, and bye for now.